My ex-husband, the man who shattered my pride as if it were a cheap glass ornament, and his new wife, the same woman he used to sneak around with behind my back, came strolling into the penthouse of my building as if they owned the skyline. Hello, everyone. How are you doing today? I hope your day is filled with peace, joy, and the kind of quiet confidence that keeps arrogant people far, far away from your heart. The story I bring you today is one soaked in humiliation, betrayal, and the sweetest form of justice. It follows a woman who was belittled, mocked, and discarded by her ex-husband and his smug new bride. Painful to imagine, isn't it? But hold on to your seats, because this is where the plot flips right out of their manicured hands. What if the luxurious penthouse they strut through, bragging and boasting, is actually, brace yourself, owned by the very woman they humiliated? The protagonist of today's story, Lorani, comes face to face with her ex-husband, Ravan, and his shameless mistress-turned-wife, Mira. Mira, dripping with arrogance and cheap perfume that tries too hard to smell expensive, smiles sweetly and says, "Well, well, look who it is." Then, clinging to Ravan's arm like a decorative brooch, she adds, "Honey, it actually makes me sad to see her all alone like this." But what Mira doesn't know, what she couldn't even imagine in her wildest, most delusional fantasies, is that the floors beneath her heels belong entirely to Lorani. How will they react when they learn the truth? How deliciously red will their faces turn when they realize the woman they mocked is the owner of everything they're bragging about? Just thinking about it warms the soul, doesn't it? The ending of this story will bring you a deep, elegant satisfaction that lingers long after the final word. But before we dive into this gripping, high-voltage drama, take a moment to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your support is my greatest strength. All right, are you ready for the moment when arrogance gets crushed under a silent, icy smile? Let's begin. Lorani never expected to see Ravan again, let alone in the marble-lined lobby of the Skycrest penthouse tower, the very building she had poured her soul into. She stood near the reception desk reviewing tenant documents, dressed in a simple cream blouse and tailored black slacks, calm, quiet, entirely at peace with her new life. She had long since left behind the chaos, the shouting matches, the lies, the scent of betrayal that used to linger on Ravan like a second skin. But life had a strange sense of humor, and today it delivered its punchline with heels clicking on polished stone. Ravan entered the lobby first, tall, broad-shouldered, still walking like a man who believed the world should part for him. He looked older than before, more strained, a little hollow around the eyes, as if the new life he'd chosen came with a price tag heavier than he expected. But Mira walked like glitter poured over spite, her red dress dazzling under the chandelier lights, her arm looped tightly through Ravan's. She scanned the lobby with a smirk, the way one might look at a place they assume they're superior to. Then her gaze landed on Lorani. That smirk sharpened like a blade. "Oh my gosh," Mira breathed dramatically, nudging Ravan. "Do you see who that is?" Ravan turned, and the moment his eyes met Lorani's, something flickered. A mixture of shock, discomfort, and something else he quickly masked with indifference. "Lorani?" he said, as if the name tasted foreign on his tongue. Lorani nodded politely. "Ravan, Mira." Mira let out a laugh that pretended to be harmless but dripped venom with every note. "Wow, you work here? At the front desk?" Lorani didn't correct her. She watched the confidence in their ignorance bloom. "No wonder you look so tired," Mira added, tilting her head with fake sympathy. "But honestly, I admire you. Not everyone can handle simple jobs." Ravan didn't speak, but his silence spoke enough. He let Mira do the degrading, the way he always used to do when they were still married. Lorani simply smiled. "What brings you both here?" "A tour," Mira announced proudly. "We're thinking of buying a penthouse. Something classy, you know, something that suits us." Ravan exhaled, adjusting his expensive watch as if to reinforce the fantasy Mira was selling. "We have the funds," he added. Too quickly, too defensively. Lorani nodded again, every inch of her face perfectly controlled. "I see." A concierge approached, bowing respectfully toward Lorani before turning to the couple. "Miss Lorani, everything is ready for the showing. Will you be conducting it?" Mira blinked, twice. Her smile faltered. Ravan frowned slightly. "Conducting the showing?" Lorani took her access badge from her pocket. "Yes, I own the top 3 penthouse units. I oversee all viewings personally." Silence devoured the lobby. Mira's mouth fell open in slow motion, her eyes widening with pure shock, her posture stiffening in disbelief. Ravon inhaled sharply, the color draining from his face. Lorani slipped her badge into the elevator's VIP panel, and the doors opened with a chime. She stepped inside and turned to look at them. "Shall we begin your tour?" Mira scrambled forward, heels clacking wildly as she rushed in. Ravon followed, dazed. The doors closed. The elevator ascended. "You own the penthouses?" Mira finally choked out. "All three," Lorani replied calmly. "My grandfather left me the building before he passed." Ravon swallowed audibly, staring at the floor as if it might swallow him whole. "I didn't know." "You never asked," Lorani said. The elevator stopped with a soft ding, and the doors opened to a hallway drenched in warm gold lighting. Mira stepped out slowly, like someone terrified of stepping into their own humiliation. Ravon followed, his confidence unraveling thread by thread. Lorani led them toward the glass double doors of the elite Skycrest Grand Suite, the penthouse every social climber in the city dreamed of entering. The city's skyline stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, glowing with late-afternoon light. Mira's breath hitched. Ravon froze. Lorani looked at them both, her expression unreadable but her eyes sharp with a quiet, devastating strength. "Welcome," she said, scanning their stunned faces. "To my home." Mira's knees almost buckled. Ravon gripped the side of the marble counter for balance, and somewhere deep inside Lorani's chest, a long-sleeping, long-wounded part of her finally exhaled. Ravon's fingers curled tighter around the marble edge, as if anchoring himself was the only way to stop the ground beneath him from collapsing. He had walked into this penthouse, expecting to flaunt, to boast, to show his new wife that he had moved on and upgraded his life. Instead, he found himself standing in the shimmering heart of Lorani's empire. Her space, her success, her silent triumph. Mira blinked rapidly, trying to regain her composure, but her voice betrayed her. This entire place is yours?" she croaked, spinning slowly, her eyes soaking in the gold-veined countertops, the sweeping staircase, the sky-high windows displaying a skyline that bowed beneath them. Lorani nodded. "Yes." Mira forced a laugh, but it cracked like thin ice. "Well, I mean, of course. You always had, taste." Ravon looked at her sharply, silently begging her to stop talking, but Mira never knew when to stop. She stepped closer to the window, trying to hide her trembling. "It's just, hard to believe someone like you owns something like this." Lorani raised a brow. "Someone like me?" Mira swallowed. "I mean, someone who dresses so simply." Lorani wasn't offended. If anything, she seemed amused. "Wealth isn't always loud, Mira." Ravon winced. Mira flushed. The silence that settled next was thick, humiliating, and unbelievably delicious. For Lorani, at least. She moved gracefully through the room, her presence confident and quiet, the kind that made even the luxurious penthouse seem like an accessory to her power rather than the source of it. "Let me show you the upper floor," she said, pressing a discreet panel on the wall. A second staircase illuminated from within, each step glowing softly. Mira whispered under her breath. "There are 2 staircases?" Ravon muttered back, "There are 3. Mira nearly tripped. As they ascended, Ravon's breathing grew heavier. He wasn't out of shape. He was unraveling, mentally, emotionally, the way a man does when confronted with the ghost of his past triumphs, turning into present shame. The second floor opened into a gallery-style loft, adorned with minimalist art and glass railings that overlooked the grand living room. Mira gasped. Ravon stood very still. Lorani continued walking. "This floor houses 2 guest suites," she explained, each with private balconies and smart glass features. She tapped the wall. The windows instantly shifted from clear to opaque, flooding the room in a soft golden glow. Mira pressed her lips together, overwhelmed. Ravon tried to look indifferent, but his eyes betrayed him. "You did all of this after we divorced?" he asked quietly. Lorani turned to him. "I did all of this while we were married." Silence hit harder this time. Mira blinked. Ravon stiffened. "I oversaw the renovations, the designs, the investments," Lorani continued. "You were busy. Busy cheating, busy being careless, busy convincing himself she was the burden." Mira's jaw tightened as the realization sank in. Ravon wasn't just shocked, he was intimidated, deeply, painfully. Lorani walked past them again, heading toward the final staircase. "I'll show you the top floor," she said. The ascent felt heavier this time. At the top, the doors opened into a breathtaking rooftop conservatory, encased in tinted glass that cast emerald shadows across the floor. Mira froze entirely. This is like a palace. Ravon stared at the ceiling, at the plants, at the sheer impossible beauty. "This wasn't here before," he whispered. "I added it last year," Lorani replied. "I wasn't aware you visited the building since our last argument here." Ravon clenched his jaw, remembering it. The shouting, the accusations, the way he had stormed out like he was the one wronged. Mira shot him a questioning look, clearly unaware of that history. Lorani moved deeper into the conservatory, the air filled with the scent of jasmine and warm sunlight. "I built this space to remind myself of growth," she said, "of what blooms after destruction." Mira flinched. Ravon looked away. Lorani turned to face them fully. "Now," she said calmly, "tell me which unit you came to see. I'll arrange access." Mira blinked rapidly, clearly overwhelmed. The mid-tier penthouse? The one listed at, $4 million? Lorani nodded slowly. "Ah, that one." She walked toward a sleek control panel embedded into the wall. "I removed it from the listing yesterday," she said. Mira gasped. Why?" Lorani met her gaze coolly. "Because someone else reserved it this morning." Ravon frowned. "Who?" Lorani's eyes darkened with a meaning neither of them recognized. "A long-term tenant," she replied. "Someone who values honesty." Ravon's lips parted. Mira couldn't look at him. "If you're interested," Lorani added, "the next available unit starts at $8 million. Mira nearly choked. Ravon went pale. $8 million? Mira whispered, her voice a strangled squeak. "Is there anything cheaper?" Lorani tilted her head. "There's a basement studio in the annex building. It's unfinished." Ravon bristled. "We're not—" But Mira cut him off. "We'll take the tour," she said softly, her pride bleeding from her voice. Ravon looked at her in disbelief. "Mira, we'll take the tour," she repeated, her eyes pleading with him to shut up. Lorani studied them both slowly, taking in the cracks forming inside their picture-perfect arrogance. Then she nodded. "As you wish." They followed her back toward the elevator, Mira walking with the stiff steps of someone whose dreams were crumbling beneath her feet. Ravon kept staring at Lorani's back, at the calm dignity she carried like a crown he never saw when he had the chance. The elevator descended, the lobby lights reflected off the glass, painting their reflections with cold accuracy. Lorani poised, Mira shaken, Ravon deflated. When the doors opened, Mira rushed out first, needing air. Ravon lingered. Lorani stepped out last. He turned to her, eyes shadowed with something painful. "Lorani," he said quietly, "I didn't know." She met his gaze. "You never cared to know." He inhaled sharply. "Mira, she didn't mean—" "She meant exactly what she said," Lorani replied, "and that's fine. People reveal who they are without realizing." Ravon looked down, ashamed. A strange stillness settled between them, like two lives finally acknowledging the truth buried beneath years of lies and pride. Before he could speak again, Mira called out sharply, "Ravon, are you coming?" He flinched. Lorani lifted her chin. "Enjoy your tour of the basement unit," she said calmly. Ravon swallowed. "Lorani, you really built all this?" Lorani nodded. "And more." Something in his expression crumbled then. Regret, realization, maybe even grief for the life he threw away. But that wasn't Lorani's burden anymore. "Goodbye, Ravon," she said softly. He opened his mouth, closed it, and finally turned away. As Lorani watched them leave, Mira tugging Ravon's arm, Ravon casting one last glance back, she felt something warm settle in her chest. Peace. Not revenge, not triumph, just peace. Because sometimes the greatest destruction isn't loud. It's the quiet moment someone realizes they underestimated the wrong person. Lorani turned back toward her private elevator, her reflection trailing elegantly behind her as the doors closed. "They mocked me," she whispered to herself, "in my own penthouse." Her smile sharpened slightly. "But what I revealed—" The doors sealed with a soft chime. "Destroyed them." Lorani stepped out of her private elevator into the quiet elegance of her penthouse hallway, the world outside glittering like spilled diamonds across the skyline. But instead of basking in the satisfaction of what had just occurred, she exhaled slowly, leaning one hand against the wall. She wasn't shaken, just contemplative, letting the echoes of the encounter settle. Seeing Ravan again had unearthed memories she had buried under layers of success, discipline, and self-worth. Not because she still loved him, those feelings had evaporated the moment she realized he loved the idea of control more than he ever loved her. But because facing the people who underestimated you is never effortless, even when you hold all the power in the room. She walked toward the kitchen island, the marble cool under her fingers, her thoughts drifting back to the years she spent suffocating in silence while Ravan and Mira thrived on chaos. She remembered the nights he didn't come home, the mornings he returned wearing excuses disguised as apologies. The afternoons Mira would call accidentally, her voice smug and syrupy, pretending she didn't know she was breaking a home. Lorani had been quiet back then. Too quiet. She had been the kind of woman who swallowed pain whole, hoping that love would digest it. But that woman no longer existed. She opened the fridge, poured herself cold jasmine tea, and took a seat on the bar stool. The city murmured beneath her windows. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen. Her assistant, Nara. "Yes, Nara," she answered, her voice steady. "Miss." "Lorani," Nara said, her tone sharp with urgency, "you told me to notify you if anyone suspicious tried to request access to your units." Lorani's posture straightened. "Who is it?" "A woman," Nara replied, hesitating. "She's emotional, demanding. She insists she needs to speak with you immediately." Lorani blinked once, slowly. "Describe her." "Tall," Nara said, "wavy hair, wearing a red dress." Lorani closed her eyes briefly. Mira, of course. "Where is she now?" Lorani asked. "In the lobby. She refused to leave. She's been pacing in front of the desk for 10 minutes. Should I call security?" Lorani considered it. She could. It would be easy, satisfying even, to have Mira escorted out like a troublemaker. But something in her intuition tugged at her. "No," she said finally. "Send her up." Nara inhaled. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Lorani said. "Direct her to the guest lounge." "Understood." The call ended. Lorani set her phone down and took another sip of her tea, letting the floral coolness steady her. What could Mira possibly want? An apology? Impossible. A chance to pretend nothing happened? Ridiculous. Or maybe, just maybe, the facade Mira wore so confidently had finally cracked. Lorani didn't rush. She wasn't the one seeking answers. When the elevator pinged, she remained seated. The footsteps that approached were uneven, heels hitting the floor too fast, too forcefully, like someone trying to outrun their own emotions. Mira appeared in the doorway, her face a storm of shock, embarrassment, and something Lorani didn't expect. Fear. "Lorani!" Mira blurted, her voice cracking. Lorani raised a brow. "Mira!" Mira stepped in, her composure unraveling with every breath. I know this seems crazy," she said, wringing her hands, "but I need to talk to you." Lorani didn't move. "Then talk." Mira hesitated, then sank onto the opposite bar stool like a puppet whose strings had snapped. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then finally whispered, "Ravan is not who he pretends to be." Lorani blinked once, calmly. "I'm aware." Mira shook her head violently. "No, you don't understand. Something is happening. Something bad." Lorani sipped her tea, unimpressed. "Mira, whatever trouble you and Ravan have created is not my concern." Mira flinched. "Please, just listen." Lorani gave her a measured look. "I'm listening." Mira swallowed hard. "Ravan, he's drowning us. Financially." Lorani's expression did not change, but her silence encouraged Mira to continue. "He told me he was doing great," Mira choked. "That his business was booming, that we could afford the penthouse, but everything is collapsing." Lorani exhaled softly. "And why are you telling me this?" Mira looked down at her trembling hands. "Because he kept bringing up your name." A cold pause settled in the room. "Mine?" Lorani asked. "Yes," Mira whispered. He said if he could just talk to you, maybe you'd invest. Maybe you'd help him. Because you always made things stable. Because you owe him a conversation." Lorani scoffed softly. "I don't owe him anything." Mira nodded frantically. I know, that's why I'm here. Not to ask you to help him, but to warn you he's desperate. And when Ravan is desperate..." She trailed off, fear clouding her eyes. Lorani studied her. Mira continued, voice trembling. "He's planning to make you look like you're still tied to his business, like you're still involved in his affairs. He said it's the only way to keep creditors off his back." Lorani felt a quiet anger stir inside her. Not the explosive kind, but the elegant, precise kind forged from dignity. He would drag my name into his collapse? Mira nodded miserably. Yes, and he's already meeting with someone tonight to discuss it. Where? Lorani asked. Mira swallowed. At the old restaurant he used to take you to, the one on Crestview Street. Lorani's expression remained still, but a faint shadow crossed her gaze. That restaurant. The place where she once believed their marriage still had hope. She set her tea down. Why are you telling me this, Mira? Mira's eyes filled with tears she desperately tried to blink away. Because I didn't know what he was like. Not really. I thought... Her voice cracked. I thought if I won, if I took him from you, I would have the better life. She let out a hollow laugh. Turns out I inherited his lies instead. Lorani watched her. Mira wiped her cheek. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, she whispered. I didn't want you blindsided. Lorani leaned back slightly. You did blindside me once. Mira flinched. I know. You humiliated me. Mira nodded weakly. I know. You helped break my home. I know, Mira whispered again, her voice small and trembling. Lorani let the silence stretch, savoring its weight. Then she said quietly, Thank you for telling me. Mira looked up in surprise. Lorani continued, But understand something clearly. I will handle Ravon in my own way. Mira opened her mouth as if to ask how, but Lorani cut her off with a single look. Mira lowered her head. I'll go, she murmured. I shouldn't have come. She stood, wobbling slightly, and walked toward the elevator. She paused before stepping inside. Lorani? Yes. He underestimated you, too. Lorani held her gaze. A mistake everyone eventually regrets. The doors closed, taking Mira away. Lorani stood alone, the cool light from the city brushing over her face like a silent promise. Ravon wanted to drag her name into his downfall. He wanted to rewrite the truth. He wanted to use her strength again. She walked to her desk, opened a polished black drawer, and pulled out a thin file. Documents she had kept sealed for years. Proof of every lie he ever told. Every betrayal. Every weakness. She placed the file on the table, her expression sharpening with the calm precision of a woman preparing to dismantle someone who once believed she could never rise without him. You mocked me in my own penthouse, she whispered. But now, you've handed me the match. She closed the file with a quiet snap. And I will burn every lie you built. The city glimmered behind her, unaware that tonight a storm was coming. Not chaotic, not loud, but elegant, calculated, and devastating in the way only truth can be. The echo of Galani's retreating footsteps still resonated faintly in the marble hall, but Solani didn't move from her place by the grand window. Dari remained a step behind, his hand resting lightly on her waist, a silent pillar of support. Outside, the city of Atlanta shimmered beneath the late morning sun, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded in the Onyx Tower. Solani's gaze wandered over the skyline, but her mind was anchored firmly on the events of the past hours. She had never imagined that a day meant for pride and showmanship would turn into a masterclass of humiliation for the very people who had once looked down on her. Galani and Kina, the faces of arrogance, entitlement, and careless luxury, had stepped onto the threshold of her penthouse as if they owned it, and yet they had left with nothing but the bitter taste of shame lingering in their mouths. She let out a slow breath, savoring the quiet, the calm after the storm, but the faintest spark of amusement flickered in her eyes. There was something intoxicating in watching the truth manifest itself in real time. The kind of power that did not need force or loud proclamations, only patience and precision. Dari's voice broke her thoughts. You could have thrown them out earlier, Solani. Why wait? His tone was calm but curious, almost questioning, as if he were weighing the lessons embedded in her decisions. Solani didn't immediately answer. She turned her eyes toward him, her gaze soft but firm, measuring him, confirming that he understood. Because, honey, teaching someone a lesson doesn't always require shouting. Sometimes the most effective punishment is letting them stumble over the mirror of their own arrogance. Dari nodded slowly, understanding not only her strategy, but the depth of her patience. He had learned that in their life together, Solani's quiet authority often carried more weight than any display of wealth or power. He moved closer, adjusting the cuff of his jacket, and whispered, "And now?" Solani finally allowed a subtle smile to curl at the corners of her lips. "Now, we let them face the consequences of their choices. They mocked me in my own penthouse, believed themselves untouchable, and yet, the floor they scorned belongs to me. They will carry this memory longer than any money they flaunted. The thought made her feel a light thrill, not of vengeance, but of absolute justice. She let her gaze drift back to the skyline, letting the sun reflect off the glass towers. Every building seemed to bow slightly beneath the authority she carried effortlessly, and it was a reminder. Power wasn't in the clothes or cars or even the walls. They were in the mind, the strategy, and the unwavering self-respect. Meanwhile, Galani, on the other side of the city, felt as if the earth had swallowed him whole. The walk back to his small rental apartment had been suffocatingly long, and every glance at his reflection in the shop windows was a harsh reminder that his illusion of grandeur had been completely destroyed. Kina had already stormed off in the taxi, leaving only the weight of his mother's disappointed gaze to follow him home. The streets seemed unusually hostile, the honking of cars mocking the collapse of a life he had built entirely on appearances. His mother's trembling form trailing behind him reminded him that his responsibilities hadn't diminished with his downfall. They had multiplied. "Jelani," she whispered, her voice weak and trembling. "How did we get here?" The words hung in the air, heavy and accusing, and Galani had no answers, no excuses. He had lied, flaunted wealth he didn't possess, and all the walls of his facade had come crashing down. His palms were slick with sweat, and even the crisp air of the afternoon felt suffocating against his chest. That night, sleep eluded him entirely. He sat by the entrance of his tiny apartment, the only sound the relentless buzzing of mosquitoes and the faint groan of his mother from inside. His expensive suit, now dusty and wrinkled, seemed to mock him silently, a relic of the life he had constructed from pretension and empty pride. He patted his pockets desperately, searching for a cigarette, a temporary reprieve from the storm inside him, but all he found was a single piece of paper, Zelani's business card. The gold letters on the ivory card seemed to shine even under the dim light of the porch. On the back, a neat handwritten note read, "A man's pride is not measured by the clothes he wears, but by the courage with which he assumes responsibility for his life. If you are tired of living a fake fairy tale, come tomorrow at 8 a.m. The back door is always open for those willing to work hard and start from scratch. Salani." Galani's fingers trembled as he held the card to his chest. It was a lifeline, yet it demanded humility, effort, and the acceptance of a reality he had avoided for years. The sting of pride was sharp, almost unbearable, but beneath it simmered a faint ember of resolve. He had reached rock bottom, and this card represented a bridge, not of money or influence, but of redemption. The next morning, the sun rose over the financial district with a brilliance that seemed almost cruel to those who had suffered in the shadows. At the rear entrance of the Onyx Tower, the cleaning staff were gathering, uniformed in their crisp dark blue, preparing for a day that would demand hard work, sweat, and patience. At precisely 8 a.m., Galani appeared, no longer clad in an Armani suit, no longer exuding false confidence. His hair, though neatly combed, lacked the gleam of gel. His expensive watch was replaced with a simple timepiece, and his shoes bore the wear of a man returning from a long night of introspection. His heart pounded as he approached the rear security post, every step a small rebellion against the arrogance that had ruled him for years. Mr. Vance noticed him immediately. Recognition flickered in his eyes, a mixture of disbelief and cautious curiosity. "Mr. Galani?" he said hesitantly, his voice a thread of surprise. "What are you doing here?" "Did you come to look for yesterday's rental car?" Galani shook his head, letting the last remnants of his pride fall into an imaginary trash can. With a deep breath, he extended the business card to Mr. Vance, his hand steady despite the storm of humiliation inside him. "No, Mr. Vance," he said quietly, his voice low but clear. "I have come to look for work. President Salani told me there was a vacancy on the cleaning team. I am willing to be assigned to any position. I am ready to work." Mr. Vance stared for a moment, processing the transformation of a man he had witnessed the day before as an arrogant, entitled businessman. Now, standing humbly, head bowed slightly, Galani radiated a sincerity that no one could fake. A small, genuine smile touched Mr. Vance's lips, devoid of professional formality, recognizing the courage it took to abandon pretense entirely. "Understood, Galani," he replied. "Follow me to HR. But remember, the rules here are strict. No special treatment for knowing the owner." Galani nodded, unwavering. On the top floor, behind the glass walls of the penthouse, Salani observed the scene through the CCTV monitor. Derry stood beside her, noting the transformation, his hand gently holding her waist. "He came," she whispered softly. "He chose to abandon appearances to assume responsibility." A faint, almost imperceptible smile curved her lips. "Let him go through the process alone," she added. "Let him feel what it is to earn with his own sweat, not deceit. That will be the best school of life for him." Meanwhile, in the lobby, Galani was guided to the HR office, surrounded by curious glances from the staff who had witnessed the previous day's debacle. Whispers rippled through the room. "Isn't that the guy from yesterday's penthouse scene? He's here to apply as a janitor?" Galani ignored them, focusing solely on the present moment, on the tangible steps he could take to rebuild the wreckage of his life. He filled out the application with meticulous care, writing in the position box, "Maintenance team, cleaning staff." Each stroke of the pen felt heavier than any deal he had ever signed, yet more liberating than any fake business contract. The weight of truth was palpable, the responsibility immediate, but Galani welcomed it, feeling for the first time in years that he was doing something real. Each piece of paper, each signature, each acknowledgement from HR was a brick laid in the foundation of a new life, built on effort, humility, and responsibility. Outside, the city buzzed on, indifferent, unaware that beneath the glass towers, a man was learning a lesson that money, luxury, and appearances could never teach. By mid-morning, the cleaning staff were in full motion, sweeping, mopping, dusting, each person absorbed in their work. Galani joined them, carrying a mop with precision, scrubbing a spilled coffee stain on the lobby floor. Sweat beaded his forehead, dripped down his temples, but the feeling was not one of exhaustion. It was liberation. He had traded pretense for honesty, false pride for real accomplishment. Mr. Vance watched him from a distance, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. This was a man transformed, and no title, no wealth, no appearance could ever replicate the authenticity of this moment. In her penthouse, Salani allowed herself a small sigh of satisfaction. The lesson had begun, not through confrontation or intimidation, but through the quiet, relentless exposure of truth and the opportunity for redemption. Derry's hand remained steady on her shoulder. "You did well," he said simply, and knowing words were unnecessary to convey the depth of his respect. Salani's eyes lingered on the lobby below, on Galani, now part of the rhythm of labor, of life lived authentically. She smiled softly, a smile of relief, not triumph. This was the victory of integrity, not humiliation. The city's noise rose, but within the walls of the Onyx Tower, the resonance of honesty, responsibility, and renewed purpose echoed louder than any honking car or passing pedestrian. Galani moved with the flow of the team, his movements deliberate, each step a tangible acknowledgement of the consequences of his past choices. He collected trash, scrubbed surfaces, and performed tasks he had once sneered at, and yet with every action, he reclaimed a part of himself lost to vanity, pretense, and arrogance. By noon, the lobby sparkled, clean to perfection. Staff members exchanged glances, impressed not just by the cleanliness, but by the transformation they had witnessed. Galani wiped the last streak of floor polish, stepping back to assess his work. There was pride now, but not the hollow pride of yesterday. The next morning began not with the glitter of wealth or the hum of polished luxury, but with the simple, sweeping rhythm of responsibility echoing through the lower floors of the Onyx Tower. By dawn, the maintenance team was already moving with practiced coordination, their footsteps soft against the tiles, their uniforms crisp in the pale morning light. Galani arrived early, earlier than instructed, carrying with him a resolve that had settled deep in his bones overnight. The weight of yesterday's humiliation still lingered, a quiet ache, but beneath it pulsed something new, purpose, and for the first time in a long while, honesty. He walked through the staff entrance with steady steps, nodding respectfully at the guards. Gone was the swagger, the smug grin, the air of empty superiority. In its place stood a man rebuilding himself brick by brick, the dust of his past still clinging to him but no longer defining him. Mr. Vance spotted him and approached with a clipboard. "You're early," he said simply. There was no judgment, no disbelief, just acknowledgement of a man taking his new role seriously. "I didn't want to be late," Galani replied. "Not today, not any day." Mr. Vance nodded, appreciating the sincerity. Good, today you'll join the lobby sanitation team again, but later we'll rotate you through the upper commercial floors so you learn every corner of this building. I'm ready, Galani said, gripping the mop handle as if anchoring himself to the promise of a better self. As he cleaned, Team lost its usual sharpness. The world shrank to the rhythmic movements of the mop gliding across the floor, the scent of lemon polish, the soft hum of morning workers passing by, offering brief nods of acknowledgement. Some still whispered, some exchanged curious glances, but none of it fazed him. Let them talk, let them wonder. Their gossip was nothing compared to the truth he was building. Hours passed, the work steady and grounding. As he wiped down the glass windows framing the lobby's exterior, his reflection wavered faintly in the streakless surface, not the arrogant man he once projected, but someone quieter, humbler, stronger. At the top of the Onyx Tower, Solani observed from her office monitors, not obsessively, not with the thrill of revenge, but with the calm discernment of a woman who understood human transformation intimately. Derry entered the room, carrying a tablet filled with the day's schedules. He's working hard, Derry noted, watching the screen with a mixture of surprise and reluctant admiration. Solani nodded without looking away. Humility grows best where pride has been burned to the ground, Derry smirked. You and your quotes, they're not quotes, she replied softly. They're reminders. When she finally stepped away from the screens, it wasn't because her interest wavered. It was because she knew growth needed space, and she refused to hover over a process that was meant to be earned, not supervised. Meanwhile, in the lobby, two cleaners approached Galani during their break. Mara, a kind-eyed woman in her 40s, and Juno, a younger man known for his sharp humor. Mara tilted her head as she studied him. Yesterday, you walked in like you owned the building, she said. Today, you're scrubbing floors like you've been doing it your whole life. Her words weren't cruel, just observational. Juno patted Galani's shoulder. Man, that fall must have hurt. Galani let out a breath, not defensive, not wounded. It did, he admitted. But sometimes, you need to hit the ground to realize you were never standing on anything solid to begin with. Mara's expression softened. Juno raised his brows. You talk like someone who's been through it. I have, Galani said quietly, and I'm not done paying for it. Their break ended, but something in the air shifted. Respect, or at least the beginning of it. Hours later, Galani was instructed to move to the 20th floor, the executive commercial suites. He hadn't been there since his days of flashy pretense, when he breezed through hallways pretending to belong among the powerful. Now he returned with a cleaning cart, humility tucked neatly beside the bottles of disinfectant. He pushed open the doors to the floor slowly, taking in the sight of the elegant glass conference rooms and polished hallways. As he cleaned the chrome handles of Suite 20B, a familiar voice cut through the silence. You? He froze. His heart tightened painfully. He turned. Kina stood several feet away, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her expression a swirl of shock, anger, and disbelief. Her red dress clung to her sharply, her makeup slightly smudged as if she had rushed to get here, or cried on the way. What are you doing? She hissed. Why are you dressed like that? He inhaled slowly. I'm working. Working, she repeated, voice rising. As a janitor? He nodded. Simple, solid, without shame. The disgust on her face sharpened. This is humiliating. For who? He asked evenly. You? Kina stepped closer, the click of her heels echoing sharply. For us, for everything we built, for what people will think. Galani met her gaze steadily. Something inside him finally breaking free of the illusions he'd clung to. We didn't build anything, Kina, he said. We pretended, we lied, and now we're paying for it. Kina's jaw tightened. So what? You're just going to throw away your dignity? Galani shook his head. This is dignity. Taking responsibility, working, starting over. Kina stared, stunned into temporary silence. What about me? She finally snapped. What am I supposed to do while you mop floors? You do what you choose, Galani said quietly. Just like I'm doing what I must. Her eyes glistened with something. Anger? Fear? Loss? I didn't sign up for this, she whispered. I signed up for a man with ambition. A man with ambition doesn't build his life on lies, Galani cut in softly but firmly. He builds it with his own hands. The words echoed down the hallway. Kina stared at him, her face cracking with a raw emotion she couldn't hide. Then she turned abruptly and stormed toward the elevator, slamming the button with trembling fingers. As the doors closed, Galani exhaled. It hurt, but it was necessary. That chapter, built on fragile pride and illusion, had reached its end. Later that afternoon, while wiping down the railings on the mezzanine level, Mr. Vance approached him again. "You did good today," he said. "Hard day, but you didn't break." Galani allowed himself a tired smile. "I don't have the luxury of breaking anymore." "Good," Mr. Vance replied, "because tomorrow you'll be assigned to the 50th floor." Galani froze. The 50th floor, Solani's private level, the heart of the tower. Is that okay?" he asked cautiously. Mr. Vance smirked. "It was requested." Requested? By who? By Solani? No, she wouldn't pull strings. She wouldn't interfere. Or maybe she would. Not to favor him, but to test him, challenge him, or simply to see where this new version of him would stand. That night, back in his small apartment, Galani lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His body ached, his hands throbbed, but his spirit felt steady in a way it hadn't in years. Tomorrow he would step into the highest floor of the building, the floor he once believed he'd occupy as a king. Now he would walk in as a worker. And yet, he felt no shame, only determination. Meanwhile, in her penthouse, Solani stood on her balcony overlooking the glowing city. The wind lifted her hair gently as she held a cup of tea. Derry approached from behind, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Are you sure about tomorrow?" he murmured. "Yes," she whispered. "It's time." Her eyes narrowed slightly, not with malice, but with a deep, steady wisdom. "Before I decide how this story ends, I need to see who he truly is when he stands in front of me with no lies left to hide behind." The city lights flickered like tiny stars beneath her feet. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "a truth long buried will face the light." And somewhere in the lower floors of the tower, a man braced himself for the moment he would finally stand before the woman he once broke, and the woman who now held all the quiet power in the world. Galani arrived early the next morning, his uniform pressed, his posture straight, his mind sharp and ready. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing the familiar gleam of the upper floors. But today, every step, every corner of the Onyx Tower seemed magnified, as though the building itself were silently observing his transformation. He pushed his cleaning cart forward, moving toward the 50th floor. Each floor he passed reminded him of the life he'd once thought he owned, the illusion of wealth and superiority he had wielded carelessly. The higher he went, the tighter his chest became, not from anxiety, but from anticipation. Solani's penthouse level was just a few floors away, and he knew that stepping onto that floor would confront him with more than just polished surfaces and grand decor. It would confront him with judgment, with power, and with the truth he had long evaded. As he entered the 50th floor, the gleaming hallways reflected light like liquid silver. The doors to the suites stood in sharp contrast, their minimalist elegance exuding subtle but unmistakable authority. Cleaning the railings and the door handles, Galani felt the weight of history pressing against him. Every reflection in the polished floors reminded him of his past arrogance. Every gleaming surface whispered the echoes of laughter he had once thought harmless, but which now stung like shards of ice. He moved slowly, deliberately, meticulously ensuring every corner was spotless. This was not just about cleaning. It was about proving to himself that he could face the consequences of his previous life without flinching, that he could embrace humility without it diminishing his worth. While working, he noticed a familiar movement near the penthouse entrance. Kina had returned, her presence more imposing than ever, her steps echoing loudly on the marble floors. She stopped abruptly when she saw him. Her eyes narrowed, lips pressed tightly together. "I thought I made it clear," she said, voice low but firm, "that you have no business here." Galani didn't flinch. He simply nodded, as if acknowledging a fact rather than responding to a taunt. "I'm here because I work here," he said evenly. "Whether you like it or not, this is my responsibility today." Her mouth opened, then closed again. She couldn't formulate a retort strong enough to pierce the calm that had settled over him. It unnerved her more than any insult ever could. She spun on her heels and strode toward the elevator, her heels clicking in an angry rhythm. Galani exhaled slowly, his heart steady. Later, as the day moved on, he reached Solani's office suite, a place that had once seemed unreachable, reserved for the highest echelon of power. Today he approached it as a worker, not a rival, not a supplicant, not a man clinging to illusions. He wiped down the door handle carefully, then the surrounding paneling, until every fingerprint vanished. When he finished, he stepped back, allowing himself a moment to absorb the space. The air felt heavier here, saturated with authority and intent. He knew Solani could appear at any moment, and when she did, the truth would be undeniable. He was no longer the man he had been, and she, in her poised elegance, was the arbiter of the moment. Hours later, Solani did indeed appear. She descended from her penthouse with the quiet grace of someone who commanded attention without demanding it. Dressed in a tailored suit that accentuated her figure and presence, she moved toward him with measured steps. Galani straightened instinctively, a deep, grounding breath filling his lungs. "Galani," she said softly, eyes scanning him from head to toe, "you've done well." Her words weren't filled with praise or scorn, merely acknowledgement. Yet in that acknowledgement he found validation, not of ego, but of effort. "Thank you," he replied simply. "I wanted to prove that I could face this truth." Solani's gaze lingered on him, sharp but approving. "It takes more strength to face humility than it does to wield arrogance. Remember that." He nodded, understanding the depth behind her words, and in that moment, something shifted. The air around them seemed to pulse with anticipation, the city lights outside the windows catching on the sleek surfaces like tiny diamonds. Just as he was about to leave the suite, the elevator doors opened. Galani turned, and his heart skipped a beat. There stood Kina once again, flanked by Galani's ex-wife, Marissa, and an unexpected figure, Talon, a man whose reputation for manipulation preceded him. Their expressions were a mix of astonishment, fear, and disbelief. You're cleaning here?" Marissa's voice trembled, more from shock than accusation. "Yes," Galani said quietly. "I work here, and I take my responsibilities seriously." Kina's lips curled into a sneer that faltered mid-expression. "You can't seriously think this changes anything," she spat. "You're still you." "I'm a man who has learned," Galani corrected calmly. "A man who understands that actions define character more than appearances ever could. And right now, I am taking responsibility for mine." Talon stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "This is a setup, he hissed. "Something's not right here. You wouldn't—" Galani looked at him directly, unwavering. "I'm exactly who I am, and I'm exactly where I need to be. No setups, no games, just the truth." The room grew tense, the air thick with unspoken consequences. For the first time, Galani realized that his position, once a source of shame, had become a shield. No mocking words could pierce him anymore. No scorn could diminish the authority he had built from integrity. Solani watched silently, her arms crossed, observing as the arrogant trio grappled with a reality they hadn't prepared for. And then, in one deliberate move, she stepped forward. "Galani's right," she announced. "You three have mocked, lied, and attempted to undermine him. Yet here he stands, not with rage, not with revenge, but with dignity. And that dignity is built on his own hands." Kina staggered back. Marissa looked pale, and Talon's mouth opened then closed, searching for a retort that didn't exist. Solani continued, her voice calm yet commanding, echoing in the penthouse suite. "This penthouse, this floor, this entire building, everything you once used to assert superiority over him now operates under principles you refused to understand: respect, accountability, and genuine effort. And Galani embodies those principles." The three exchanged helpless glances. Their arrogance had led them here, and here they remained, exposed, humbled, and confronted with a truth they hadn't anticipated. Galani felt a quiet power rising within him, not as a weapon, but as a shield of integrity. For the first time, he realized the satisfaction wasn't in their humiliation. It was in the calm knowledge that he had emerged above the chaos, whole, unbroken, and genuine. Solani's eyes softened slightly, just enough for him to sense approval. "I will allow one of you to speak," she said. "Choose carefully." Talon cleared his throat first, stumbling over his words. We didn't know. You thought arrogance would shield you," Solani finished for him. "And it did, until truth walked in." Kina finally spoke, her voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "He's just lucky," she spat. "This changes nothing." Galani smiled softly. "It's not luck, Kina. It's integrity, patience, and effort. Qualities you've refused to cultivate." Marissa remained silent. finally realizing that the mockery she had once believed empowering now looked petty and hollow against the calm, steady strength of a man who had rebuilt himself. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until finally Selani spoke. "You've learned a lesson, whether you realize it or not. Let it sit with you." Then turning to Galani, she offered the smallest, most elegant nod. "You may continue with your duties." As he returned to his work, sweeping the floors with careful attention, he felt the weight of history lifting from his shoulders. The mockery, the lies, the arrogance of others, it all dissipated in the glow of hard-earned respect. He was no longer defined by their perception, and in the quiet moments, as he polished the final railings of the penthouse hallway, he realized that revenge wasn't the point. Mastery over one's own integrity was. Later that evening, when the last light dimmed across the city skyline, Selani and Galani stood together on the balcony, surveying the bustling world below. "You've changed," she said softly, "more than I imagined." He met her gaze, feeling the sincerity and weight behind her words. "I had to," he said. "Not for them, not even for me, but for the truth of what I could become." She smiled, the kind of smile that radiates power and grace simultaneously. Derry joined them, his presence steady, watching the quiet moment unfold. "Tomorrow," Selani said, voice firm but gentle, "marks the final chapter, and this time it will be unforgettable." Galani nodded, understanding fully. The last piece of the story, the pinnacle of revelation and elegance, was approaching, and in that moment, standing above the city lights, he felt unshakable, grounded, and ready. The following morning, the penthouse was bathed in golden sunlight, each ray reflecting off the marble floors like molten gold, illuminating every carefully placed piece of art, every glinting surface, every subtle sign of power and precision that spoke of Selani's impeccable taste. Galani moved through the penthouse with steady grace, finishing the final touches of his duties, the soft sound of the broom brushing against the floor echoing in the vast space. Today was different. He could feel it in the air, in the slight chill of anticipation that mingled with the warmth of the rising sun. Selani entered the penthouse, her presence magnetic as always, yet today there was an additional glint in her eyes, a spark that whispered of the reckoning about to unfold. "They'll be here soon," she said quietly, almost to herself, though Galani heard every word, "and this time they won't know what hit them." He nodded, understanding that the culmination of weeks of careful planning and silent observation was about to unfold. "I'm ready," he replied. The moment had arrived. A sleek black car arrived at the building entrance, and within minutes, Galani saw through the glass walls the arrival of Marissa, Kina, and Talon. Their expressions were identical to yesterday, expecting arrogance, expecting superiority. But today the penthouse itself seemed to hum with an invisible force, signaling that nothing would be as they imagined. Selani moved forward, a soft but deliberate tap of her heels echoing in the hallways. She opened the doors to the penthouse with a fluid motion, and the three intruders stepped inside, immediately overwhelmed by the scale and elegance of the space. "Well, well," Kina sneered, though her voice faltered, betraying a flicker of doubt. "Looks bigger than I imagined." Marissa's eyes darted nervously between surfaces, between Galani and Selani, while Talon attempted to mask his unease with a forced smirk. Galani stepped forward, his posture calm, his gaze steady, the very embodiment of composure. "Welcome," he said evenly, voice carrying across the space. "I trust you find the penthouse impressive?" Kina laughed, a sharp sound, but it lacked the bite it once had. "Impressive, yes, but it's still just a penthouse. It doesn't change anything." Galani's smile was slow, measured, and utterly composed. "Ah, but that's where you're wrong, Kina. You see, everything here, every floor, into every fixture, every intricate detail, is under my ownership, and I assure you, that changes everything." Silence fell. Marissa's mouth opened slightly, then closed, and Talon's face paled. "You own this?" Talon stammered. "Yes," Galani said, the quiet power in his voice filling the space. "This penthouse, this building, the floors you've walked on with such arrogance, they are mine. And you, my dear guests, are standing on property that I control entirely." The shock on their faces was electric, almost tangible. Kina's eyes widened, disbelief giving way to panic. "That's impossible," she exclaimed. "We've been coming here to visit Galani. We—" Her words trailed off, lost in the enormity of the revelation. Galani's calm presence made her panic seem almost comical, but he didn't mock her. He simply allowed the truth to settle over them like a velvet curtain, heavy and suffocating in its inevitability. Salani stepped forward, the elegance of her movement demanding attention. "Do you now see," she said, voice smooth and commanding, "that arrogance and mockery are powerless against those who rise with patience, intelligence, and integrity? Galani has built not just wealth, but mastery over himself. And that mastery defines power far more than wealth or pretense ever could." Marissa's voice cracked as she tried to form words. We thought we didn't know." "Exactly," Galani said softly, each word deliberate. "You didn't know. You assumed superiority based on illusion, not reality. And today, reality is unavoidable," Kina trembled, her carefully constructed facade of confidence collapsing as she realized that every condescending remark, every smirk, every attempt to belittle him had been for nothing. "So, what? What now?" she whispered, almost to herself. Galani's eyes met hers, unwavering. "Now you leave. You leave with the understanding that mockery is powerless, that arrogance is fragile, and that true strength is silent, steady, and earned." Salani raised her hand, signaling security subtly stationed nearby. "If any of you linger, if any attempt to disrupt this order, you will find yourselves removed, swiftly and discreetly. Consider this the final courtesy." Talon looked like he might speak, but the look in Galani's eyes, steadfast, unyielding, resolute, stopped him cold. He swallowed and nodded mutely. Marissa clutched Kina's arm, and together they shuffled backward toward the doors, Talon trailing behind, their previous bravado completely eroded. Galani allowed himself a quiet exhale as the trio disappeared from view, the sound of their heels fading, replaced by the calm resonance of the penthouse. He turned back to Salani, who regarded him with approval tempered by grace. "You handled that beautifully," she said. "Not with rage, not with spectacle, but with authority. The elegance of restraint is far more powerful than the spectacle of revenge." He smiled, a quiet, satisfied smile. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, about ensuring that integrity, once quietly established, triumphs over mockery. Salani nodded, the corner of her lips curling upward slightly. And triumph it did. Together they walked through the penthouse, the sunlight bouncing off crystal chandeliers and polished floors, reflecting a life built with care, patience, and vision. Galani's earlier anxieties had vanished, replaced by a serene confidence he had never felt before. This was not arrogance. It was mastery of self and circumstance. "Do you feel it?" Salani asked softly. "The weight of what has changed?" Galani nodded. "I feel it, and it feels right." The city stretched below them, bustling with life, oblivious to the quiet triumph that had occurred atop the skyline. Every honk, every whisper, every footstep seemed distant compared to the serene victory of the penthouse. As the evening settled in, the city lights began to flicker on one by one, casting a soft glow across the room. Salani and Galani stood on the balcony together, shoulders brushing lightly, united not just in circumstance, but in understanding and mutual respect. "Tomorrow," Salani said, voice calm yet filled with subtle excitement, "marks a new chapter, not just for you, but for this space, for the legacy of integrity it represents. Arrogance will never touch it again." Galani smiled, his heart full. "Then we move forward," he said simply, "with clarity, with dignity, and with purpose." And so, as the night embraced the city, the penthouse stood as a testament to quiet power, to the rewards of patience, to the elegance of triumph without spectacle. Galani had emerged not just victorious in ownership, but victorious in spirit, embodying the truth that mockery, cruelty, and arrogance can never overshadow resilience, patience, and integrity. The city stretched endlessly below, lights shimmering like stars scattered across an earthly sky, but Galani's gaze was fixed on the penthouse itself, on the life he had reclaimed, and on the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing that the ones who had mocked him had been defeated not by shouting or scandal, but by the undeniable elegance of truth. In that golden glow, standing tall and unshaken, he realized that the greatest revenge is always subtle, always poised and always inevitable. And as Solani smiled beside him, the world outside continued, unaware that the most intense drama, the most satisfying revelation, and the most elegant justice had all unfolded quietly, flawlessly, and irreversibly. I'm really glad you're here and that I could share my story with you. If you liked it, show me by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Let's see how many of us there are. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from. I share new life stories for you every single day, and now 2 of my most popular stories will pop up on the screen so you can choose what to watch next.